If you've been following the news for the past few years, especially since COVID, you'll know that we're having all kinds of epidemics of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, stress, ADHD. And when I looked at social prescribing, I was really surprised to learn that, this can treat a whole host of health issues, everything from the ones we talked about, anxiety, depression, to also things like chronic pain and type 2 diabetes, even dementia in some cases. Most social prescriptions tended to involve one of these five ingredients: moving our bodies, paying attention to nature, engaging in the arts, engaging in some kind of community service, volunteering, and having a sense of belonging with each other.
Hi, possibility seekers. How are you? I'm back and I have such a special guest with me today. Her name is Julia Hotz, and let me introduce you to her. She's quite a rock star. I'm holding up her book, by the way. For those of you who don't know, she is a solution focused journalist based in New York. Her stories have appeared in the New York Times, Wired, Scientific American, the Boston Globe, Time, and so many other places. She helps other journalists report on the big news changing the world at the Solutions Journalism Network. For her work on the connection cure, she has been invited to speak at TEDx and SXSW to deliver keynote speeches, medical school lectures, healthcare panels, and to advise health and community organizations. Welcome, Julia.
Thanks so much, Monique. So great to be here.
So I personally read the book from cover to cover. I prevented myself from doing too many highlights because I didn't want to ruin it for anybody else, but I do have some highlights in the book, as you can see. So tell us what prompted you to write the book?
So, what prompted me to write the book really was curiosity. Before I was even a journalist, I was a sociology researcher in the UK. And at that time, this was 2018, I read this really interesting headline. The UK had established a minister of loneliness, literally appointing a government person to work on the problem of loneliness the same way they'd work on, problems of security and education and so on. And so I became really curious about that. And I thought, what is actually a loneliness minister going to do? And to find out, I put out some surveys and held some focus groups and actually talked to people who identified as lonely according to this, clinical scale. And it turns out this was a really smart investment for the UK. The healthcare over there is nationalized, and loneliness, it turns out, has a ton of health consequences. Our own US Surgeon General says the health consequences of being lonely are equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So, lo and behold, Monique, I talked to these people. What do you want the loneliness minister to do? And they said, it's not that hard. We just need more spaces to meet each other, to meaningfully connect. We don't need an app. We don't need, PSAs. We just need spaces to do the things we love. And it was actually through interviewing them I'd heard about sort of a parallel revolution in healthcare for this thing called social prescribing, which your listeners might hear that and might already get the idea that, yes, this is literally about a doctor or a therapist prescribing you a community activity like an art class or bicycling lessons, the same way they'd prescribe a pill or a therapy. So, yeah, I was really curious about that. And that is where our book journey began.
So I loved every page of this. I want you to the book, for those of you who are not watching us on YouTube, the subtitle of The Connection Cure is The Prescriptive Power of Movement, Nature, Art, Service and Belonging. So just elaborate a little bit for us, Julia, on the premise of the book and how you weaved it into it, into the content that you did.
Yeah, and so, loneliness was sort of the tip of the iceberg, but if you've been following the news for the past few years, especially since COVID, you'll know that we're having all kinds of epidemics of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, stress, ADHD. And when I looked at social prescribing, I was really surprised to learn that, this can treat a whole host of health issues, everything from the ones we talked about, anxiety, depression, to also things like chronic pain and type 2 diabetes, even dementia in some cases. And so this movement for social prescribing started in the UK, but it's actually spread to 30 countries around the world. And we could talk more about why. But as I was doing this research, I realized that most social prescriptions tended to involve one of these five ingredients: moving our bodies, paying attention to nature, engaging in the arts, engaging in some kind of community service, volunteering, and having a sense of belonging with each other. And so the book is sort of organized through those five ingredients, talking about the way that moving our bodies, for example, is really good for issues related to feeling kind of stuck and sad. Exercise literally boosts our mood boosting chemicals like serotonin.
And I can attest to that because if I don't work out for 3 days in a row, I'm an absolute certifiable bitch.
Aren't we all, though? Aren't we all?
Now, I know that about myself. Some people just don't, and they don't realize that if they just worked out, they wouldn't be so bitchy.
Exactly, and it's just that simple, and, some of this stuff, it's not rocket science, like, of course, our doctors tell us to work out, of course, they tell us we should get out of our house and talk to people, but what I really love about social prescribing, and I think is so aligned with your own philosophy and coaching logic, is that it's not just about a doctor wagging their finger and saying, "You should exercise more because it makes you less of a bitch," or it makes you healthier, or it helps you maintain a healthy weight, whatever it might be. It's actually about flipping the script from not just focusing on what's the matter with you, not just focusing on the symptoms of whatever condition you have, but also focusing on what matters to you, right? Like, what are the kinds of activities you love to do as a kid? What would you do if you had 2 more hours in your week? And then literally connecting it to a medical prescription.
I loved reading about the older people that felt like they were at the tail end of their lives, and they just got a second lease on life by just doing the things that they were passionate about. It was the swimming, it was the cycling, it was the gardening, it was all of these things that they just picked up, and they realized, "Oh my god, I still have joy. I still have the ability to fill in the blanks."
Exactly. And that's just it. And I think that's a really interesting, I think, misconception with older adulthood. This idea that as our bodies age, as our minds age, that, we should really take it easy, slow down, rest more, stay in more. For sure, we should always be prioritizing things like sleep and self care, but there becomes a point where actually that can become sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and if we believe, there's this amazing psychologist I talk about quite a bit in the book, Ellen Langer, who focuses on older adults, who says that actually we've got that all wrong. We, as we get older, that's a time to become even more active. That's a time when socializing and keeping your mind engaged becomes even more important. Our bodies really, really respond to our environments. And so you're absolutely right. In the book, that looked like people like Amanda, an older woman dealing with divorce and her mother's death and all kinds of separation, finding a new friendship and new lease on life through these swimming lessons. Even, for dementia too, we tend to think of this as something where we need to give our older loved ones, constant care and attention. And of course, there's some truth to that. But what I love about this farm that I visit is it's actually giving those people a sense of sort of independence again, right? Even people who can't drive are then taken to this farm where they get to, help out with little things around the farm, feeding the chickens and the cows and so on. And also in the process, socializing with each other. So, yeah, I love those too.
I love that. It's funny because for me personally, I started taking up cycling more, I'm part of a cycling club and my husband is a crazy cyclist. Like he goes 20 miles an hour for 40 miles. Like he's a crazy man. So I'm with the semi crazies that operate at the 15 to 17 miles an hour range, which is fine.
That's fast. That's so fast. What?
So I just love that part of it, and it gets your body moving, and it gets your endorphins pumping, and it gets your serotonin going, and it's just, and doesn't it beat sitting on the couch for 3 hours? I don't know.
It totally does. I really think culturally we've seen sort of a rise in cycling again. I love it. Where I live in New York City, I try to take the bike whenever I can. But you're so right. The way that we sort of just lose ourselves in the ride, the way that we also, as a knock on benefit, if we're doing it outside, get to enjoy nature. This book really talks about how the goodness you feel from that is not just in your head. Time in nature has an incredible capacity to boost your attention and focus. Moving your body, as we talked about, boosts your endorphins, your serotonin, your dopamine, all this. And so there's just so many knock on benefits of doing this. It's kind of a surprise that we haven't been prescribing these things in medicine all along.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I wanna say one quick thing because I wanted to connect the dots from my own experience just this past year. My husband and I went to Bordeaux and did a cycling trip with a few friends, and I tell the story of being in on the bicycle in nature, looking at all these vineyards, looking at all these fields of lavender, smelling, being so in it. It was such a different experience for me, and even, being French and being born in Fr and all of that. It wasn't that, it was this idea that I was literally in it as opposed to being in a car or in a train or where you're above it and you're not really connecting. Here you're really connecting on a level that was so visceral. And I said that to him. I said, I really feel that we need to do more of these trips because whether it's walking or cycling or whatever, but being in nature, and like now it's freezing cold, as you know, but we're trying to make it a point that during lunch break or whatever, we go outside, bundled like a snowman, but bundled nonetheless to get the air and the light in our eyes. It, creates the circadian rhythms that you want and it makes you feel better. And I was like, actually, my next question, which was like, what's the science behind the prescribing movement, nature, art, service, and belonging? What are we finding?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I just love that. That was like a super social prescription you did there. Not only the cycling in nature with your husband, someone you feel a sense of belonging with, but also just Bordeaux.
The wine was so unbelievable. It was just so unbelievable. People are like, "Wait, you drank wine and you cycled and you drank wine?" I was like, "Yes."
Yes, that's why you do it.
Well, it's weird because you don't when you drink really good stuff, you don't drink the crap with all the additives and the sulfites, you're not drunk. You're fine.
It's grapes in nature. Absolutely. Well, I love that. And absolutely. Again, it's not in your head. And the book really gets sort of specific with it. Like, for example, when you're have something like type 2 diabetes or depression, the symptoms of which are often associated with sort of feelings of stuckness, sadness, movement, can counteract that big time. A lot of randomized controlled trials and different studies show that exercise is often just as, if not more effective than antidepressants. And as I say that, I should note to all your listeners, this is absolutely not an anti-medicine book. This is about having another option on the menu. It's just about making it as easy to prescribe group cycling courses as it is antidepressants. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole body of literature there for attention disorders like ADHD or even the effects of stress to an extent. There's a lot of research suggesting that spending time in nature can restore your attention. There's a whole theory around this called the attention restoration theory. And it basically says that nature is one of the few things in our modern, busy, chaotic world that has the potential to capture our attention without taxing it. And the result is that we spend time in it and we feel almost as if we've had a good night's sleep. We become more focused, more calm. So many interesting studies supporting this. One from these neuroscientists that showed people who spend time in nature versus those who they compared it in a condition with spent time next to this like busy highway had less activity in their subgenual prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain associated with rumination. So there's all that. And then, I mean, I could go on and on, but for art, it's generally around disorders involving trauma and anxiety because of the way art can sort of expand our perspective. For service, that chapter talks about a woman with chronic pain, another woman with dementia. It talks about the way that service really helps us move sort of beyond problems of the self and can literally make our pain less painful. And finally, belonging is one that, is just so important across the board. And I think there has been a wider conversation now in our own country as well about the health harms of loneliness. But what a lot of the research suggests is that when we don't have that, when we feel excluded, our bodies register that as physical pain. There was one study that showed people who felt lonely or excluded rated a room as feeling colder than those who didn't.
Isn't that wild?
It's so wild. There's so many studies like this, Monique, that show this. And it's just, yeah, I'm sure your listeners know, and everyone who follows your beautiful, philosophies know that it's so important for your environment and what you're passionate about to, to reflect what you're passionate about. But this book really showed me that it's not just in our heads, it's coded in our bodies.
So imagine just to exacerbate that point the point is exacerbated by today's FOMO culture, compare and despair, and the feeling of always being left out, of not belonging to fill in the blanks, not being enough of fill in the blanks. It's all of that, and I feel like we're creating this physiological trauma on our bodies from psychological interpretations of what is going on around us. And if we could only imagine more intention around what we put around us, on us, with us. Imagine the implications of that, positive implications of that. So I so incredibly resonated with the points that you made in the book. And I thought, well, how, where are healthcare systems implementing social prescribing today?
I mean, absolutely. Your 7 secrets, they so are supporting this idea of surrounding yourself with what matters to you. And when I use those sort of cutesy phrases, people might hear that and think, "Yeah, yeah, okay, this sounds nice, but is are doctors actually doing this?" And the answer is yes, and there's a lot of reasons why. In addition to, the science we just talked about how this really can move the needle on some of the most common conditions, our healthcare systems are also at a breaking point right now. This all started in the UK where there was a statistic suggesting that 1 in 5 doctor's appointments are made for purely social reasons.
That blew my mind. Okay, I just want you to repeat that so that people can really get what you just said. It's insane.
It's insane, and I'll even one up this with an example. The statistics suggest that 1 in 5 doctor's appointments are made for social reasons, meaning people are coming to the doctor with real symptoms, but the root cause of them are social, right? There's nothing that a doctor would be able to prescribe to help them feel better without this sort of raft of social prescriptions. And I'll give you one. I mean, I always think about this story that a hospital executive told me that one of his, attending doctors told him. He said, once there was this man who would come to the emergency room every Friday night. Now, this is in the UK, by the way, so this is all covered, right, by taxpayers. Every Friday night, he's coming to the hospital, and, the doctors, the nurses, they're going through the tests, they're asking him questions, they're not really sure what's wrong. So finally, one of the nurses says to him, John, I'll call him John. John, it's really interesting. I'm looking at your record here, and it shows that every time you're coming in, it's on a Friday night. Why do you think that is? And John says, it's obvious, right? If I were home all by myself at the weekend, I would lose my mind. He even says I would commit suicide. So it's like just awful the extent of loneliness that people feel. And the doctor, worse, the emergency room is sometimes the only place they can turn to. And that's a really obvious one, but As I'm talking about this book with people, especially among doctors, they're saying, "Oh, yeah, I know a lot of people like that." And they might not realize that they're lonely. But when I ask them questions about their life, it's clear to me that they're here because they don't know where else to go and what else to do. And so, to your question, where is this happening in healthcare? Well, that's the why, right? Because that is a huge waste of resources if we have people just coming to the doctor and hospital because they're lonely. And so what started in the UK, really early models dating back to the 80s and 90s, very much picked up in the late 2010s, around the conversation, like we said, with loneliness, even more so during COVID. I think we all felt, the importance of connection and the pain of isolation during that. And what's really exciting now is that even though we might hear that and we may think here in the US, like, okay, the UK is an anomaly. They have universal health care. They're such a tiny island. There's no way that would work here. Well, believe it or not, it is starting to come here. You know, there's a great organization called Social Prescribing USA. It's a coalition of doctors and researchers and community organizers who are trying to make this mainstream in healthcare and are doing it sort of at the local level.
Love it.
Yeah. So it's really exciting.
I really wanna see that just spread, and I think with word of mouth, we probably could do it. So, would that website give a listener the opportunity to connect in their local market area?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they are an open membership. It's run by totally volunteers right now. And they're also very connected with not just the organizations in the UK, but also bigger countries like Canada and Australia, where they've had success with this sort of bottom up model of social prescribing. And I would also say to listeners who are like, yeah, I want that. There's also a growing movement to make these social prescriptions available in the meantime without even going through your doctor. So, on the book website, which is socialprescribing.co, people can sort of look up what medicine is interesting to them. They can ask some questions related to, what matters to you, and, they can actually look up to see if there are organizations near them that might offer, say, an art class or an opportunity to volunteer or an opportunity to walk and run or cycle with a group. There's so many of these groups out there, and now what we're working on in the US is connecting that to healthcare.
Yeah, there you go. I have to make sure to put that in the show notes and also, where people can start to connect. So somebody's listening and they self-identify, right? They understand that they see a little bit of their pattern of behavior or a sister or a mom or a spouse or a friend, and they know ultimately this could help them. What do we do with that information?
On one hand, we might if I'm that sister or mother or friend that somebody's worried about, I don't know how I would react if someone said, "Hey, I think you're lonely," or "I think you're depressed," or "I think you're anxious. Try this." I think it starts the other way. It starts with the what matters to you. I mean, the implication probably why you're worried about this friend or reaching out is because you're worried about them. You're worried about maybe they went through a breakup or a loss or, are just feeling sort of down lately. There are these 10 questions we can ask, all variations of what matters to you. I think that's a good place to start because, it gets a little bit more specific than like what matters to you or what would cheer you up. It asks you to think like, I might have said this one earlier, but if you had 2 more hours in your week, Monique, what would you spend it doing? Or was there a sport that you loved as a child but haven't had a chance to pick up since? Or is there something that when you talk about it, I see your face light up? I think those are the kinds of things that a caring friend or daughter or spouse or parent should look out for. And then based on that, sort of go in the direction of the social prescription. We don't even have to call it that. Yeah.
Right, it's very funny. I think there's a couple things I that come to my mind is like first is have you heard about this thing that's like really causing people to get really healthy? It's called social prescribing. Have you even heard of this? I just heard a podcast on it, and they said that da 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 da. Can you believe it? So does that mean, and you're talking to the woman who or man or person or whatever that needs this thing, does that mean that if I go back and start painting again, I'm gonna my rheumatoid arthritis might be less, you know, obnoxious? Can you believe it? Oh, let's give it a shot. Let's give it a shot, shall we?
Exactly, exactly. That is beautiful. You modeled that brilliantly, and I think culturally, that's what we all need to do, and I think we know this on some level. You know it well. I mean, I think we're in similar circles sometimes. We see people in the wellness space talking about how much our environments affect us. And, I think what I've learned about writing this book or even just talking about it is people respond to science. So that rheumatoid arthritis example is great because I could show you 5 studies that show engaging in the arts reduces your inflammation, which will make your symptoms of arthritis less painful. So much comes back to inflammation.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, this is the other thing too, is I'm a huge, wellness and nutrition person, and I discovered 24 years ago now that I was very, very allergic to gluten, and that was before everyone was like, "Yeah, let's go gluten-free." Like, it was a now it's a trend, it's a fad. I had an allergy, and when I had it, I was feeling so awful. My hair was falling out. I had all sorts of shit going on. And, so I got real deep into the connection between what I put in my mouth and how my body responds. And that's when my journey started about, like, environment and what you put in, not just what you put on, but what you put in is really important. Inflammation, anti-autoimmune diseases is inflammation in different forms in different organs. So if you have Hashimoto's, you have inflammation in your thyroid. If you have Crohn's, you have inflammation in your intestinal tract or your, or your colon or whatever, wherever it is connected to the itis, you have inflammation. So, and so the other thing that really blows my mind is people my age and or around that, or we're talking about retirement or what do we want to do when we grow. I think about it. What do I want to do when I grow up? Because I haven't grown up yet. And it occurs to our friends and my husband and I that being part of a community is critical to aging gracefully and well. Because if you're isolated, isolation is death. And you can die 5 to 10 years earlier. I mean, the statistics are in your book. And unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably been exposed to one or two statistics, I would say. So that's why these communities are now growing more and more prevalent, communities where I can enter as an independent person doing whatever, and then as I need more and more care, I don't have to go anywhere. I'm still connected to my friends. I still know the neighborhood. I still go to the same parks, and I'm happy.
Exactly. That is exactly it. It's so simple. It's hard to believe we needed a book or a healthcare movement about it.
Yeah, we need to be reminded constantly because it's not obvious.
It's not obvious, and, our systems don't set us up, especially in the United States. I know you, are from France, you go there, and I'm the same way. I go to Europe whenever I can. My partner's French, like, they've kind of got the balance right. Just really eye-opening, the same way it was when reporting the book, just to see, oh, the things that are, like, normal in the US are not normal anywhere else, and likewise, the things that are normal in France are not normal in the US, and I think everything you're talking about, this idea of, like, community sort of being a part of your life, work not being the center of your life, but a part of your life, really valuing beauty and laughter and passion and everyday food, all this is so, so, important, and sometimes I wanna be careful with how I talk about this because I could see somebody listening to this and thinking, "Oh, well, my depression or my arthritis or my type 2 diabetes or my anxiety, like, what are you saying? It's my fault?" And it's like, "No, no, 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 absolutely not." But 2 things can be true. Just as it is true that there are some environments that make those symptoms worse.
That's a good point. Very good. Thank you, Julia, for taking the time to distinguish that.
Right. Just as there are some that can make your
Yep.
symptoms worse and are totally not your fault. I think we also have to take the other side of that and say there are also environments that can make you feel better. And let us move our health care, not just our sick care, to set us up in those environments, right? Let's make it as easy as possible to choose the life you love, to create the life you love.
Yeah, right? It's so true. It's funny because it is a mind shift, right? When you ask a European what they do, they're like the Frenchman would be like, "I garden, I like to drink wine, I like to smoke, I like to have a good time.
Yeah.
I cycle, I play tennis. What do you want?"
Yeah.
"Oh, you want me to tell you my job? Oh, that is different." The first thing an American says, you ask an American what do they do, they're like, "I'm an engineer. I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. I'm an Indian. I don't know. I didn't ask you what you do to bring home a paycheck. I asked you what you do, like what you like to do."
Right. It's just unbelievable that, yeah, same words, totally different interpretation. And not just interpretation, but literally like whole life built around that difference. So, gosh, that's so spot on. I'm gonna try that. Now I'm gonna like really push back and try that.
Yeah, yeah, just to see for fun. So I'm gonna my last question is the one that I always love to ask people, that are older, and I bring them back, and now I'm going to bring you forward and bring you back. So let's say you're 60 now, and what would you have wanted to accomplish between now that you've written this phenomenal book and you're on a journey to educate people on what you know to then?
Ooh, great question. Is it corny to bring it back to what we're saying? Like, I'd like to garden more, I'd like to cycle more, I would like to be better about decentering work from my life. And I mean, you get it. You've written a book. It's a wonderful experience and it's also a little bit vulnerable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I tell stories. My brother called me and said, "I can't believe you told that story." And I was like, "I gotta be real, yo. I gotta be real. If I can't share the warts, no one's gonna believe me when I share the roses."
Absolutely. So much of that. And that's been really great. I think culturally, like, people are really responding to authenticity, so that's great, but I think maybe being an American and everything that comes with that, I've spent so much time, thinking about how could I do time better? What could I be doing to get the word out and be a million places at once and talk to the conference, the journals, the articles, the podcast, blah, 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 blah. That's all great, but I think that because this mission is so close to my heart, it's also how I wanna live my life, and I would rather take a slower road to trying to make social prescribing more mainstream. If I'm 60 and people have heard of social prescribing and they can go to their doctor and get a social prescription, that'll be the success, and I hope I'll have had a little part in that, but I know that a lot of it comes down to talking to great people like you who have been, you know, talking about the philosophy behind this and just getting us all aligned on that same path. That's the goal.
That is the goal. I love it, and I am going to do whatever I can humanly do to help you get there.
Oh, likewise, likewise, Monique.
Thank you very much, Julia. Appreciate your time, energy, insights, your book. For those of you who did not hear me in the beginning, I'm gonna repeat it. Shameless plug. The Connection Cure, The Prescriptive Power of Movement, Nature, Art, Service, and Belonging. I highly recommend it. I can totally say that because I read it from cover to cover. And I invite you to reach out and connect with Julia and have her speak at your events and your podcasts and your message. So let us know what you think of the podcast. Share this with people that you know will appreciate it. Share it with people that don't know just because. I love you all. I invite you to make it a great day. Thank you all. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to Possibilities with Monique de Maio, where we unpack life as a female mover and shaker. If you like the show, please consider liking it or better still, subscribing to it and leaving us a rating. It truly does help. Also, you can pick up my book, The 7 Secrets to Creating a Life You Love, a practical guide for women in leadership, You can find the book, other episodes of this podcast, and how to stay in touch at moniquedemaio.com. DEMAIO. I look forward to seeing you again soon. With gratitude, Monique.